beneficial to our society. We live in the most unequal society in the world today. We witness absolute poverty on a daily basis, and our government's effort remains futile. Our government continues to pump money into SAPs while leaving the disenfranchised and under-resourced toiling in the dust. Our government, through the police, continues to perpetuate the inequalities that apartheid branded our country with, and due to this, we call for their defunding in the hopes of saving our home. So now, on to my first point, systematic solutions. By the end of this point, I will have to prove how defunding the police and allocating the budget towards community growth is more important than tackling the problems at hand. Police are the equivalent to putting a plaster on a tumor. They are symptomatic treatment, employed to cover up and manage the decades and centuries of inequalities present in South African society. Side proposition may try and stand up here today and say the police are our saviors, managers of peace, and those who stop crime and save us all. But we tell you, this isn't true. Crime and infringement do not occur due to lack of police, but due to the circumstances of the perpetrators. Such perpetrators who have been disenfranchised since birth and are thus resorting to crime for survival, a human instinct. The South African Police Service takes up a disgustingly large amount of the national budget, as I'll expand on in my second point, but this sum is ultimately misplaced. Compared to the 105 billion rand allocated to the South African police services in 2020, only 95 million rand was dedicated to community development. And out of a 400 million rand meager dedicated to police policy, social policy, and integrated service delivery. To put this in perspective, community development is equivalent to 0.0009% of police funding. We are currently focusing on apprehending those who have committed crimes or infringed on public safety, which is not done greatly by any means, but we have not addressed the issue of why this is happening in the first place. The vast majority of those people forced into crime, whom our government tries to their hardest to paint as the enemies of the state.
Surely you could just get that money to fund community services from the corruption and money stolen from the example of the coronavirus relief fund.
Well, I'll get onto that in my second point. We were talking about how the misallocation of funds will actually be part of the money given to other community-funded solutions, right? So, where is I? So if you look around at how under-resourced the impoverished communities in our country are treated, you're forced to realize that many state-declared criminals are not actually criminals, but their situations breed their actions. Thus, we on side proposition argue for drastic defunding of the South African Police Service, where such money can be placed into community development schemes. Such community development... Such community development will ultimately upend the need for such an authoritarian police presence, as those who previously would have been slaves to circumstance would now have a real chance at leading a life that we all take for granted. This would in turn also decrease the need for such police forces in under-resourced areas, creating a cycle where less and less money needs to be dedicated to police to continue operating as they are, and more into the actual fabric of our country. Community support and upliftment programs run by community members, workshops and skill centers to teach expertise and needed to thrive in this world, and newfound job opportunities. This is what we stand for. This is what the police defunding can achieve. This is important because we will begin chipping away at the inequality that has loomed over our land since apartheid, to slowly equip our country and the communities around us with the skills and resources necessary while removing the authoritarian presence who only serve to keep up the status quo. These interventions are the bricks that make up the road to a brighter future for all in our country, and we can achieve this by defunding the police to help all break the cycle that has held so many down for so long. Now, on to my second point, the actual use of the budget. I'll prove by the end of this point how the police budget is mismanaged without even taking into account the corruption that makes up a huge part of it. The corruption, by the way, that adds up to roughly 10 billion rand being taken away from the police budget every year. And how this then removes opportunity from other sectors of society. Every year, the budget for police increases by an extraordinary amount. Now in 2020, the police budget is 105 billion rand and expected to increase by 7 billion to 112 billion rand in the coming years. Yet, yearly, there are expenditures which go nowhere. Police frequency tags in a recent event were 375 million rand, roughly 4.5 times more than the community development budget, were abandoned in a warehouse, not used. Every year, billions are also lost in administrative endeavors due to improper fund management. And oftentimes, millions of rands worth of brought equipment do not actually end up in the police's hands. Constant happenings such as these show us how the money provided to the police are not properly looked after and not properly given to the right people because of poor fund management, and how defunding and ultimately changing the face of the police, as my second speaker will elaborate on, is necessary to award these sectors of society the money that isn't actually going anywhere, Macon, as you'd asked me to address. So we are now all aware that maintaining the current monetary allocation is not sustainable. Ensuring defunding campaign with proper monetary allocation is not just better for our national budget use, but will also benefit the communities that need such funds to go about their daily lives. Such funds, usually wasted in futile endeavors, can then be reinvested into the community.
Hello? Hello? Okay. Adjudicators ready? Speakers ready? Over 300 billion rand was provided to South Africa for a COVID-19 relief fund. Currently, an investigation for 4 billion rand stolen due to corruption is taking place. This is one of a small example of how money we could use in order to better fund education, mental health issues, and creating jobs can be used. Thus, the alternative to this problem and the alternative to defunding the police and not picking the low-bearing and hanging fruit. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Will Macon, and I am Speaker 1 of the opposition. And before I start and get into my rebuttal, before I start and get into my substantive matters of my 3 points, which is where's the money, Lebowski, 2, Uno reverse, and 3, Narcos, I would like to get into a bit of rebuttal. So Speaker 1 of the proposition comes up and talks about 2 points, systematic solutions and the budget use. Yet his first point, systematic solutions, ignores human nature. Angry people do angry things, ladies and gentlemen, and the police, by the philosophy of police, are set up in order to mitigate and prevent these angry people from doing more angry things. Thus, we see a irrelevance of defunding the police and making their impact less. You see, their argument is very utopian, and it ignores the fundamentals both of human nature, as I mentioned, and the duty of the police. His second argument of budget use is, I will get into that in my substantive matter as my rebuttal is integrated. And on to my first point. No, thank you. Where's the money, Lebowski? First of all, we don't need to defund the police and pick the low-bearing fruit in order to get the money to improve other institutions, as I have mentioned. You see, ladies and gentlemen, as I mentioned earlier, 500 billion rand was given for coronavirus relief, 4 billion of which has been stolen due to corruption. As Izzy had mentioned, although the police fund is very high, for education, it is double of that. For post-education school, that fund is more than the police fund. And for the health fund, it is double of the police fund. You see, ladies and gentlemen, what the money you can get instead of the police fund is from this corruption that's taken place. From the corruption from the Zuma era that saw over 500 billion rand stolen. So, and this links into my second point of Uno Reverse, is that, in fact, we need more money going into the police. More money will allow for better training, will allow for better policemen, for less police brutality, for more responsible action taking place, and a safer society. An example of this, I would like to bring up the fact of New York in the early 1990s. You see, New York by the early 1990s was a completely lawless society. It had one of the highest murder rates per capita, extreme amounts of petty and street crime. But what was the solution? Well, when the mayor Randolph Giuliani came in, he implemented a broken window tactic. A tactic of funding the police and cracking down on all criminal activity. What resulted was a drastic decrease of all criminal activity and a revival of New York as a city. An example how funding the police can indeed help. How we don't need to pick the low-bearing fruit and take the money from the police fund, rather take it from from the money that's laid waste due to corruption. My third point is that of narcos. You see, ladies and gentlemen, defunding the police will only increase organized crime. The police is multifactorial, as in there are many divisions, such as investigations, such as an anti-gang unit. Defunding the police will inevitably lessen and decrease these departments and these divisions' power. And what is the point of that? As I mentioned earlier, providing more money could better these police, and in fact better these divisions in order to have better investigations, have better gang units, etc., etc. And the problem with this is if as soon as we start defunding the police, what will result? Well, it will result in organized crimes and organized criminals, taking their chances to gather more power, as there are less control due to the police, so they can come in and broaden and spread their power. You see, ladies and gentlemen, I'd also like to bring up excuse me, the fact that that as soon as we defund, this is what my speaker 2 will get into, is that of police and how they scare criminals in not doing bad things and controlling society and making it. Thank you.
Wait, sorry, I need to get my time. Yeah. Okay. For a functioning society, safety is key. For a functioning society, trust in the state is key, but this is not where we are. This is not what we've achieved. But this is what we as Side Proposition are determined to reach. In my speech, I'll be talking about the alternatives of the status quo. But before this, I'd like to get onto some rebuttal of Will's speech. So Will first offered a POI to Isaiah, and then he went on to that later in his speech about taking money from corruption and the COVID relief fund, all of those examples. But he doesn't understand that there's no possible way to achieve this. There's no way to suddenly refund a bunch of state accounts because, Zuma took a bunch of money through the Guptas to Dubai. That is not something you can get back, and not once did he say how you can, okay? And if he's talking about just taking away from the general funds that corruption is taking place, he doesn't understand that you are harming the people who rely on those funds because corruption won't stop. You're not providing any means to actually stop corruption. Then he went on to something about angry people do angry things, and that, therefore we shouldn't defund because people who commit crimes are inherently evil. But this is exceptionally ignorant, and not once did he tackle anything about the effects of communities and the effects of impoverished and under-resourced communities on crime, right? Which I think we can all agree is something that is very prominent because people actually have to survive. And when they don't have the means provided to them by the state, by things like community funds, they have to resort to crime because there's no other way to do so. Okay, and then on to the second thing, right? About, again, about the corruption. He didn't say how, you'd get any of that back, and he refused a bunch of POIs. And then he went on to compare funds, right? To say, we should all, pretty much put them on one thing, but he doesn't understand that certain things definitely need more money than others. We can all guarantee that education needs more money than policing because that is a way more prominent issue in our society, okay? And then he went on to speak about how police, need more money, which is better training, right? But not once did he tackle that in the States. It's one of the biggest police budgets in the world, and yet they have rampant, police, brutality, all of those kinds of things. He also himself said, money equals corruption, and it was pretty much shooting himself in the foot there. And then I'll also talk about later in my speech about how policing isn't actually the option. Then his third thing about defunding the police equals more crime, taking away from, proper groups within the policing units. But he ignored our take on communities, and not actually how, being able to assist these communities through community funds actually, helps chip away at this crime. So now onto my substantive matter. So the alternate things for the status quo, right? By the end of this point, I will have proven that the status quo, with police operating almost every single state regulatory function, is damaging to society, and that defunding them and establishing regulatory or other regulatory channels is ideal. As I speak to you all today, we are supposed to be trusting our police to keep our society safe. We are supposed to be trusting them to respond to emergency calls of all natures and react uniquely to each one in a way that manages the situation properly and instills safety. However, ladies and gentlemen, this is not where we are. This trust is not there. I do not wake up in the morning feeling a sense of peace that my country's police force is doing what it should, No, I'm waking up knowing that the opposite is happening. I know that policemen are responding to emergency calls regarding a schizophrenic, not with the intent to peacefully manage and de-escalate the situation, but with syringes full of ketamine and batons to beat such a vulnerable person into submission. Only then taking them to the hospital if they are feeling truly charitable. You see, us listening to this debate, we are not exposed or truly exposed to the horrors of our police force, with our private security companies and our neighborhood watchers shielding us from the truth. Police, with devastatingly general training, not as a result of insufficient funding, but rather than being expected to respond to thousands of unique situations, and thus not being trained in anything in depth, which is absolutely a necessity for such a function, right? And they are causing untold damage. We have police responding to mental health emergencies alongside armed robberies and murder, which are two very different situations that are somehow painted with the same brush and the same response. And the police who respond have dismal expertise in both areas because they pretty much have to respond to so many things. Not right now, thank you. This is where Side Proposition steps in. By defunding the police and investing into communities and breaking the cycle of disenfranchisement, as my first speaker expanded, we also have the ability to develop specialized entities off the large police budget. Okay, we can reduce the police to an absolute backup, a shell of what it once was, and in its place establish things like mental health services, gender-based violence response teams, by law enforcement enforcement for like minor response things, like residential response teams, violence infringement teams, like the list goes on and on, operating independently of each other, so you're not having a reusal of shallow-based skills that end up actually damaging the people and the communities. These, teams will have a narrow yet in-depth training in their areas of operation, and they're not the same as your drug bust or your crime thing, because most of the time, these people still aren't given the proper training as they're expected to, address a lot of other things instead of, especially nuanced teams like we're proposing, right? Equipped with the tools to manage specialized situations and guarantee the safety of all parties in such climates, instead of wasting money trying to, training police officers in dreadfully shallow manners so that they all know a little bit about everything but never enough. We now allocate their budget to specialize independently and or independent and unique teams that have the ability to properly address social issues. Such specialized teams, hand in hand with the community development expanded by my first speaker, is imperative to a safe society. To use police funding to achieve what the institution was supposed to in the first place. That being a safer, specialized response that fosters safety, and B, treating the causal issue of why police have ever been needed, the cycle of disenfranchisement and slavery to circumstance. Considering all of this, ladies and gentlemen, I'm exceptionally proud to propose. Thank you.
Hello. So, their first speaker spoke about how crime occurs as a result of circumstance, and which is as a result of poverty. Okay? But organized crime is one of the most prevalent issues in South Africa today. It is possibly the most prevalent issue in South Africa. And organized crime does not arise as a result of circumstance, but instead is ran by gangs as a sort of business which engage in drugs, weapons, human trafficking, those sort of immense issues. This sort of crime is rife in every country, developed and developing, and is not exclusive to developing countries. Police is vital to combat this, as if they don't, gang violence will skyrocket, and so we will lose the war on drugs, which we are already on the back foot of in South Africa. You speak of community growth, but you have failed to say what exactly community growth is, and how exactly it will solve these systemic issues, okay? But let's say it did yield results. It will take so long, It will take so long for these actions to actually make a tangible difference that in this time, organized crime will just absolutely skyrocket. So, you talk about how we don't have trust in the state currently, okay? And how the state can't give us justice and safety. But do you really think that taking away the police force is going to mean we're going to have more trust in the state and we're going to feel more comfortable and more safe? Yes.
Did I not say in my entire speech by creating other independent groups that are just address those exact issues instead of one group that hardly knows how to address any? Can you respond to that, please?
Yes, I will. I'll get to that later in my rebuttal. So you also spoke about how you can acquire these funds from the police force and put it into these community services and these other places. But you could rather acquire these funds from less crucial areas of the government sector, okay? Education has 246 billion rand put towards it. And our pass rate is only 78%, with you requiring with you only requiring to get 50% for 4 subjects, 30% for 2 subjects, and 40% for 1 subject. And you're telling me that you can't get funds from those areas of the government sector. Police do create safety for us, and if you believe that defunding them resulting in fewer policemen will result in less crime and more safety, you are genuinely ignorant. No. Organized crime is so rife in SA, we can't afford to take money away from the police, as no one will address these grave issues. The biggest issue in crime in South Africa at the moment, is not these social issues that you talk about how we can make these specialized groups of people to target these specific areas. We need an organized and structured police force who can combat these very big issues of organized crime. An example of this is we need a police force that can tackle millions of dollars of drugs coming into the country. We do not need a police force that's going to stop people from making small robberies and stuff. That is not what the police force is for. The police is there to tackle these big issues. No. My name is Gabriel Disarfinger, and I'm the second speaker for Team Opposition. My first point will be how police act as an imposing and powerful force which relies on people's fear of being caught as a preventative measure for crime. So defunding them will result in more crime. And secondly, how defunding the police will result in less justice being served. Police actually prevent crime through them just being an entity. Their very existence ensures that less crime takes place. Now, I'll explain this to you through a very simple example. See, I have a small brother, and I've noticed that when I look after him and I interact with him, he is mostly well behaved. But as soon as I turn my back, he immediately does something naughty. This shows a very basic concept, one of risk versus reward. Because when a child is being watched, the risk of being caught is very high and not worth the reward. But as soon as you take your focus away, the risk diminishes greatly, making the reward so much easier to obtain. So now imagine this in a countrywide scenario where the police are the authority that is watching you, keeping you in line, and will possibly catch you if you do something wrong. And yet, we still have some of the worst crime rates in the world, with over 40% of women being raped or will be raped in their lifetime, which is more than 2 in 5 women. This shows to us that even with this imposing entity, people are still willing to commit crime. So now imagine what we would do if we took this authority away. So many more people would feel the risk of being caught is low enough for the reward of committing a crime. People would no longer fear being caught because in essence, there would be no risk to committing any crimes as a result of the greatly diminished manpower of the police force, which already struggle under the excessive burdens of crime in South Africa. And this would cause crime to skyrocket through the roof. As already proven by my previous point, defunding the police will result in an increase in crime. Since defunding the police, we will experience more crime, and there will be fewer policemen to be able to deal with all this crime. It will result in criminals either not being caught simply because certain cases will be prioritized, or simply because they won't have time, or it will take forever for cases to be processed and justice to be served. This situation is already occurring in South Africa, as the police force in the Western Cape are struggling with the immense amount of reported cases and are heavily undermanned. Did you know there is a 100,000 case backlog for DNA profiling in forensic cases, which has already resulted in thousands of GBV victims not being able to receive justice? So now, we will simply just have even more of a backlog on these cases. This lack of justice being served will result in people losing faith in the government and may in turn cause people to take justice into their own hands, or could create political unrest, which would create absolute anarchy. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Speakers, boys, teachers. Side opposition have come up here and essentially tried to tell you that policemen are good people who don't endanger the public and they basically save lives, which we just know isn't true, because they've given us the assumption that more policemen equals a safer society. Now, if we look at the protests that went on during lockdown over gender-based violence, we know that there were peaceful protesters that had tear gas thrown at them by police officers for no apparent reason. I think the first speaker, Will, also said that we are utopian in our approach. However, he doesn't acknowledge and realize how crime works. As in, public centres and rehabilitation centres and all of these community uplifting groups are the answer. It's not just more police. As we've pushed this analogy that it's like putting a plaster over a cancer tumor. It's like the problem is not going to go away. Police are very inefficient. And this means that battling organized crime is not down to the police. They do it so poorly already.
Why?
No, sorry. Rather give money to the community leaders and groups who actually have to care about the issue, can actually uplift the whole community and help crime actually prevented.
Do I?
No, sorry. And then Will also talked a lot about corruption, and he started talking about corruption in South Africa. But this, as my second speaker, no, thank you. As my second speaker actually went on to rebut, he said there were actually no solutions presented, and like the amount of money that is actually corrupted within the police is drastically more than most other sectors. Well, also, he kept pushing this narrative that bad people do bad things, so that they're just inherently evil, which is also completely false. As my first speaker pointed out, people are products of their environment. This means that the whole case that we've been pushing is that we need to uplift our communities to actually prevent these people. No, thank you. To prevent these crimes. Gabriel went on to talk about gender-based violence. He gave us the stat on how 2 in 5 women will be raped in their lifetime. These not because these men are just inherently they are born rapists. It's because of constant oppression that they feel, and they don't feel the worth. They don't feel good enough because of the community that we live in today. Because of how the injustices of apartheid have left these people.
Point of information.
No, thank you. Gabriel went on to talk about how organized crime is the most common crime. This is just not true. Petty crime is actually the most common crime in South Africa. The most violent crime, however, is organized crime. No, thank you. Violent crime is the most organized, and the best way to combat this is how our side has presented it, having specialized forces, combating with militant wings who are highly skilled and they actually know what they're doing. As Luke said, we're not painting all problems with the same brush. We're having specialized groups, and then we can have our police who are the former shell of themselves, the more common people that we see around. As I said, police are useless against organized crime. Rather have different subsections of the force. Like my second speaker mentioned. There's been this whole assumption from side opposition that defunding will increase crime, that defunding the police will increase crime. Well, actually, I've just completely ignored what our second speaker has said and our first speaker. No, thank you. This is the whole crux of the debate, really, because they are essentially saying that if there's less police members, or even just if the police are more passive, that crime will increase, which we have seen from our side is blatantly not true. Yes. So to conclude, as I said, Will kept talking about corruption. However, we said that SAPS is one of South Africa's most corrupt systems in the country. As my first speaker said, 10 billion a year. And Will said that money is mentioned. It's squandered in the COVID relief fund. Whereas, as we can see, money's actually squandered all over South Africa. So I don't see how trying to take it from the police are going to do anything, and trying to plow more money into this inefficient system. I don't see how it's going to help. The system is already very poorly run, and we need to actually reassess it and maybe start taking funds away before we can look at the bigger picture. Thank you. I stand for the people. I stand for side proposition, and thank you.
Okay. The adjudicator is ready. Okay, cool.
Side proposition has made two fatal assumptions in this debate today. Firstly, that these badly explained community funds that they keep suggesting will somehow address crime better than police. This just has not been explained in any single way, and I have sufficient evidence to prove that this would not be the case. But secondly, and potentially more importantly, they seem to think that taking money away from the police will somehow make them a more effective policing body, or creating new, smaller sections of the police will somehow be able to address these problems, right? They keep pointing out problems within the police and then say, okay, so we're going to defund them and remove even more resources from them to solve these issues. It simply makes no sense. So let's go through point by point so I can explain what I'm saying in more thorough detail. So the first major point that we get from side proposition is this idea that police don't address the root of these issues, right? Clearly, South Africa has a lot of issues, which Speaker 1 took a lot of time to explain to us, even though we all agree on that. The point, though, is that reallocations of these funds won't actually necessarily do anything. Firstly, as I brought up in my introduction, we haven't really gotten any analysis as to how these community funds and community projects and committees and stuff will actually work, like how they will actually address the crime and these issues in a better way, how they will lead to, in the future, less crime overall, right? But even if we give them the benefit of the doubt and just assume that, having these better community projects and funds and whatnot will result in less crime overall, there is still the issue that we brought up, which is that crime happens anyway. Now, I know that side proposition took some trouble with the wording, specifically people are naturally angry or inherently evil. And while that may sound harsh, the simple fact is that if you go to any developed country, crime is still a major issue, specifically, as my second speaker brought up, organized crime. So regardless of what you think the reason for that is, no matter how much you address the issues within our country, like poverty and stuff like that, you will still have crime either way. That is something that needs to be addressed, and it will cost people's lives if you simply ignore it because it's supposedly less of an issue now. But even if we give them the benefit of the doubt and we take their side and say there won't be sufficient crime, everything will be fine if we just close these community funds, right? Well, we have this issue of, the history of South Africa and where we are at the moment, right? The point that side proposition brought up basically concedes that there is a huge crime issue at the moment, right? We have all these issues, they need to be addressed. We completely agree. However, they seem to think that now addressing the roots of these issues, which were caused decades ago, right, will somehow alleviate the problems we have today. And that's simply not how issues work or develop, right? We need to address the consequences of those roots of the issues now, today. You can't simply ignore the violent crime happening across the country because if we cause community funds, somehow people will generally in the future get better. No, that's not how it works. We need police in order to actually address the people who are getting murdered every single day in this country. So there hasn't been sufficient analysis as to how that will happen quickly enough that we don't need the police right now, unless they concede that we are suddenly going to have people dying in the next 7 years or however long it takes, right? But even if they are somehow able to prove this, the problem is that this crime that still exists today is going to block whatever efforts they're going to take to try and uplift these communities, right? I mean, you can say that you're reinvesting into education or into these smaller committees or whatever, but if there is now really bad crime, probably worse considering our second speaker's point on how the sense of fear of the police will now be decreased, therefore crime will increase, what we find is that these efforts will now, these crimes will now get in the way of those community projects working, right? So for instance, in schools, you're now going to have increased gang activity. Kids are going to be recruited into gangs more regularly, or at least at the same rate, which is far too much. We're going to be seeing, committees, smaller committees that are community-based, as they suggested, which simply do not have the resources, funds, or influence in order to actually deal with these things, being overwhelmed by communities that are the most desperate, the ones with the most crime. Those are going to be the ones that are going to be overwhelmed. Maybe the one in Constantia will be completely fine because they don't really have much to deal with. But if you're going to Khayelitsha, then you have a serious problem, right? So let's go into the second point. We get this idea that police are ineffective, right? They're not doing their job properly. They're responding to the wrong things in incorrect ways. They're not getting trained properly. They've, propelling police brutality across the country. We completely agree. There is nothing here that we disagree with. However, I struggle to see how taking money away will somehow solve any of that. Surely, if those are issues, we should put more money into the police in order so that they can have better training to address these issues, no? This is not something that has been addressed at all. This is especially important in increasing staff, because of the point my second speaker brought up. Now, finally, let's address these independent communities that are somehow going to replace the police, right? We again get no analysis as to how resources will be distributed between all of these communities, committees, especially because they're decentralized. Like they said that they were going to all work independently. That's going to be a mess in trying to actually allocate all of those funds, especially since this house, I take it in this debate, is the government, right? Like that is never going to work. Especially considering the current place of the police, right? These people are trying to address the issues the police are already technically addressing, maybe in a poor way. However, even if we take their side and say that they will be done completely fine, there will be people, there will be resources, whatever, there's still this issue of them basically just recreating the police in smaller forms, right? And even if they're technically going to be trained better or going to be better at handling these issues, the problem is that they are now going to have to build up from the start, right? That it's going to take time for them to get the same influence, the same resources, the same fear factor, that my second speaker brought up, that the police currently have. So you're going to have maybe up to potentially a decade of them trying to get up to the place that they need to get to in order to do what the police already do ineffectively and thus need more money for. But they're not going to get to that because crime's going to get in their way, clearly. Plus, we kept hearing from this side that there is corruption and therefore the police are allocated, the money is allocated poorly. So therefore, that is going to happen again. That is why I'm proud to oppose. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, throughout this debate, there were a few clashes, to say the least, yet two of the most prominent came in the form of society and people being held accountable and influenced by their current society and the effect of money and money allocation and redistribution. So in this debate, side proposition came up and started speaking about the fact that society causes the individual and criminals are mostly and always come from an underprivileged, a lack of all basic needs, and I mean, we don't disagree. Yet they ignore the fact of human nature. They also ignore the fact of short-term that all three of our side opposition talked about, as well as a lack of analysis from side proposition's side. We feel that this clash favors side opposition as it ignores human nature and how policing polices human nature and the bad aspects of it. Second of all, we had the big clash of money allocation, of taking the money from corruption into the communities, which was not very well explained from the side proposition to do and how to fix these communal issues, and creating independent and separate committees and communities of policing. And as my speaker 3 put it, it just sounds like a police state that's just more complicated. Thus, what side opposition brought in with the fact that that the money doesn't need to be taken away from corruption. It will only make the situation worse. First, also, side proposition ignored the fact that nor ignored the point that we made about New York, that policemen having more money were actually better, that police aren't always terrible. They also ignored the fact of the police imposing a force and less justice being served that my speaker two had mentioned. And they ignored from the aspect of organized crime, they ignored the multifactorial nature of the police, and the police aren't just patrolling around the streets there to beat you up. Rather, they are there to investigate the murders, impose anti-gang units, etc., which they didn't effectively counteract or talk upon or explain how their system would do better. Thus, ladies and gentlemen, side opposition explain to you that in fact what the status quo is right now is better than what side proposition have to offer, and thus I am so proud to oppose.
Is it ready? Ladies and gentlemen, in today's debate, I've identified three core clashes, that being funding, crime, and the role of police. So, first speaker stood up here today and he started speaking about how, take money from corruption instead of police, but he didn't say how, and we noticed that this was a huge flaw in their case because their third speaker completely abandoned it and refused to mention it. But we won't forget, they did not once say how that'll actually work. Then, second speaker stood up there and talked about defunding other funds, like education, because, we have a small pass rate, therefore we should just take away money from them, which he doesn't understand will worsen the community and will worsen that pass rate where we are so vulnerable already. Then the third speaker spoke about how we didn't have, detail how community funds would work, but we don't believe that that's an entirely necessary thing because, we already have community funds in place and it's not our job to pretty much give a laydown of every single one of them, but we know that things like workshops, we know that things like, like skills, all of those kind of skill education and intervention programs do actually work, right? And they have huge standing in their community, which they refused to acknowledge. Then on to the second thing about crime, the clash on crime, right? Will spoke up, stood up here today and he spoke about how angry people do angry things and everybody who commits crime is essentially, inherently evil. And the third speaker backed it up, talking about how in developed countries there's still crime. But none of them addressed the fact that, an impoverished community leads to crime. And they acted as if developed countries don't have inequality. But we know in the United States, there is drastic inequality that forces people to resort to things like crime, like organized crime, right? And then their second speaker spoke about how organized crime will flourish without police. But we've got two things to say. The first thing is that police won't disappear as a common fallacy amongst all of them. There are still other enforcement bodies, but they are just not in the, the idea that we know them now. They totally different organizations, right? And then secondly, the role of community comes in where you have more influence in a community, right? And then also their third speaker spoke about how crime won't allow for development in communities and it'll kind of stop that entire development if we were to do all of this stuff, and about how community organizations don't actually have resources. But we want them to know that this isn't take away 90% of all of the funds like New York is doing, which is also one of Will's stand-up points. It is a gradual thing. New York is busy defunding right now. They didn't take away all the budget, but $1 billion. It's not something that goes all at once, right? They also spoke about a scare factor, which isn't actually there in impoverished communities because a lot of the time these police actually resort to things like bribes, okay? And then also the last one on the role of police. They spoke about how the absence of police and how we need them to quell the inherently evil people who are actually just impoverished people trying to survive, okay? And the third speaker also spoke about how, we made the assumption that taking away money equals better police, but none of them actually realized that we were talking, and what we made clear from the beginning is that these are specialized units that fall outside of the police body, like mental health units and all of those kinds of things. And ladies and gentlemen, due to all of this, I think we can agree that side proposition won the debate. Thank you very much.
Whew. Good evening once again. I'm glad you're still with us. I'm sure you're all enjoying the debate as much as I am. I think some aloe vera is needed for all those burns. Too far? Okay. I think, ladies and gentlemen, whilst we wait for the adjudicators to finish things up and to finalize the results, we'll just have a bit of a chat with the boys and see how things went for them. So I'll start with you, Izzy. I noticed a lot of gesticulating, so some frequent use of the old hands. Gesticulation, when you use your hands to talk? Could you maybe just explain a bit about that for us? Is there some tactic behind it, or is it simply your passion exerting itself?
I've always learned throughout my many years of living that if you like come into contact with like a bear, you must make yourself like a bit larger. So that's how I kind of took on this debate.
I noticed that there was this was one of my favorite ones. This one.
Yes.
Yeah.
So kind of what I was thinking was if I made myself seem a little bigger, they'd seem a little more afraid.
I like it. Okay. You know, another politician who really enjoys gesticulation is Donald Trump. Are you a fan?
No.
No comment. All right, cool. Dylan, how did the debate go for you, my boy? Not a seasoned debater, but it was very nice to see you up here tonight doing your thing. How did it go for you?
Thank you, sir. I thought I did okay, sir. I thought I could have done a bit better, sir, but yeah, so hopefully we can pull through.
Good for you. Good. Joining debating next year? Question mark?
No, sir.
That's a bit busy. That's all right. Okay. Luke, who is actually a seasoned debater, very passionate up here. Had goosebumps a couple of times. Good job, mate. How did it go for you, boy?
Yeah, so it was fine. It's a bit different now having to do it to bright lights and a camera, but I mean, it's something to get used to nonetheless.
And I noticed, just like Izzy over here, very, very passionate. Do you hold any angst against the opposition, or is it
No,
just
sir,
part of the strategy?
I'm just very good at convincing myself that I hate people I'm going up against and that I'm right. It's
Very well done. Awesome. Will, did you enjoy yourself tonight?
Yes, sir.
It's a little bit nerve-wracking.
Yes, sir.
You've debated in front of a crowd before. How is this setup a little different? Is it more nerve-wracking or less nerve-wracking not having the audience here?
I'd like to touch on what Luke said. It's quite strange, like having blinding lights in front of you. Feels very, I don't know, you feel kind of way too important for the situation, but it feels pretty good. But it was a little nerve-wracking. High stakes. I mean, it's inter-house finals, so it is high stakes. Yeah.
Good. Well done.
So,
Gabriel, how did it go for you, my friend?
I thought side opposition crushed the debate. And,
There we go. That's that enthusiasm and that confidence I love to see.
yeah,
Excellent.
we're definitely going to win. I will have a chat about it afterwards, though, easy.
Okay, good. Paul, I thought you did a fantastic job tonight. You have my vote. I mean, you did a great job. Well done.
Thank you so much. There's no bias happening here whatsoever. It will be quite awkward now if we lose, considering Gabriel just hyped us up, but we'll see.
And I think a question on another matter is you're very involved with debating. Can you tell us a bit about the debating this year and how it's been a bit different from other sports and things like that, and the fact that we've managed to continue going throughout the year despite COVID?
Yeah, so obviously we couldn't meet up for like 9 months. So basically what happened was that we did Zoom meetings. And like, well, we sort of had to shift quite a few times because the school Wi-Fi keeps blocking different platforms like Discord and stuff. But basically we would have debating sessions every single week like we normally would on a Monday. We were still doing like debating prep sessions. It would actually work quite nicely because then like our coach Michaela could do like PowerPoint slides of like the notes and like the sections we were learning about for debating. We had quite a few like practice debates, which got quite heated. And yeah, I think, to be honest, this was actually one of my favorite years like doing debating overall, like of my whole time of doing it since grade 8. So I don't think COVID really got in the way of debating at all.
Great to hear. Well, very, very interesting. gentlemen, thank you so much for your input. We will continue to wait patiently for the judges. But something that I am particularly proud of this year's debating group is the fact that, as Paul mentioned, they have been meeting at a regular basis and talking on various issues around the country, particularly around the BLM movement. And I'm very proud to say that the debaters were instrumental in that movement we had at Bishop's. And the conversations around the table, revolving around the issues, were brought to the forefront of the school. So well done, gentlemen, and thank you so much. I think we're all a little bit more socially aware and a little bit more conscious of what needs to happen at Bishop because of it. So great job, everybody. Cool. Not quite yet. Further questions. So we've got 2 matrics here. Raise of hands we have. Luke Risick and Will Macon. Gentlemen, final year at Bishop's. Debating, continuing next year or not? Or are we on to bigger and better things?
So it's sometimes I think it's a discomfort that I probably shouldn't put myself through, but I end up doing it anyway. So I'm not exactly sure how next year is going to work. But so actually, just what you were saying about the entire thing of like a movement in our school and kind of tackling it, and one that's especially prevalent now. And I think us being parts of Matric, like I know there are a lot of guys here who were quite heavily involved actually in everything that's been going on. And it's really great to see, because you see people who are equipped with skills through certain things at school, and you see them able to actually apply them to something that kind of falls out of the realm of like traditional education. And I think that's what has been really valuable through something like this.
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head there, is just being able to utilize these skills in a tangible and effective manner to affect change within our country and our school has been great. So good. Well, next year, plans? Debating, yay or nay?
Hopefully I will be debating. The thing I love the most about debating is that it forces you to engage with others. And I mean, like, in today's society, I hate to get all political, but like it's very polarized, and debating is just a really nice way just to force you to see someone else's point of view.
Yeah.
Although kind of in a competitive and a heated environment, it's still kind of the lessons you learn can be taken outside of the studio, for example, and applied in the real world. So
I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think there's a sentiment that's been expressed is that we live in a post-truth society. So the act of discourse and discussion is exceptionally prevalent today, more so than ever. But I'm very, very excited when I see young guys with the capabilities and skills that you gents have. Makes me very, very hopeful for the future. So I think regardless of where we go as a country on issues like we've been discussing tonight, the future is certainly bright with intellectual gentlemen as yourselves. Okay. Without further ado, I'd like to bring up our adjudicator to go through the results. So Rachel, please come up. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I just want to say thank you to the debaters. Thank you for everyone that tuned in. I think we can all agree that that was a really great debate, a really great engagement on what's a really pressing issue in South African society and global society as a whole. And I hope that the audience and the debaters gained a lot of insight about what's going on in the world and potential solutions that we as a society can talk about, think about in order to engage with these issues. So with that said, I'm going to go into what happened in this particular debate. We saw that there were 2 general clashes. For those at home, that means basically there were 2 general issues that the debaters were speaking about that ultimately became the crux of what the debate hinged upon when we were adjudicating this matter. So there were 2 issues that we thought that the debate came down to. The first is whether or not there was sufficient issue with the police system in the status quo to warrant defunding the police. And secondly, if so, is defunding the police the best solution to reduce these crimes and general issues that were brought up about the police and society as a whole? So on the first issue about whether or not there is sufficient issue with the police system to warrant defunding, we got 2 major arguments from our proposition team. The first was that the majority of crimes in South Africa can't actually be solved or deterred through the police system, because they exist not because of a lack of deterrence, but rather because of structural issues caused by poverty, mainly from the apartheid era, that still exist in today's times. So the argument that we got there was that rather than the status quo, we should be defunding the police, funding community solutions in order to reduce those crimes. The second argument that we got is that the police as an institution don't work. So they're ineffective in a large amount of ways. They're too generalized, police brutality exists, there's a large amount of inefficiency in general, and funds are often allocated in ways in which, like, property and equipment is bought but never actually used. And because of that, they're failing in their primary burden in actually making us feel safe and reducing crime as a whole, given how high South Africa's crime rate is. We got two general responses from our opposition team. The first was that there's still the issue of organized crime that the police still need to exist to fix. So we had two general responses from our proposition team. The first was that the police are already inefficient, in that organized crime is already a major problem in South Africa, and the existence of the police hasn't done much to deter that. The second is that defunding the police would actually help this, because they would be able to focus on organized crime if we were to defund other units. The other response that we got from opposition is that we, rather than defunding the police, the issue is that we need to fund them more so that they have more money to make sure that they're an actual deterrent. And they gave us the example of New York in the 90s. We weren't sure this was a sufficient explanation of the mechanism about how exactly this will fix the structural problems of the police and structural problems in terms of poverty in South Africa. Even though we didn't think that proposition really engaged with this, we also felt that response didn't generally engage with the actual matter brought up. And based on that, we think that clash went to proposition, and we could say that there is sufficient reason to warrant defunding the police. So then, based on that, we got two solutions from each side. We got the solution about we reduce funding to the police, give it into more specialized units to deal with things like poverty, deal with things like gender-based violence. Then we got the status quo, or potentially increasing funds. So this came down to three general types of crimes that we got. So firstly, we got crimes of need, which was brought up by proposition. They said that we need more specialized units that will have a better, broader impact. From that, we got from opposition, it's not really as big of a problem compared to organized crime. And secondly, there's other mechanisms to fund this. We felt that props responded sufficiently in that it's quite unclear how the money is going to come, so that we can defund the police in this way and get money to fund these mechanisms, like these community solution mechanisms, without defunding the police. Second issue is we had organized crime. Op ran that it'll skyrocket and derail other efforts. Prop didn't really engage with this as well as they could have, but we felt that it probably was okay, given that the crimes of need was framed to be a bigger issue in South African society. Last thing was we talked about general crimes, specifically gender-based violence was spoken about, and we felt that the matter brought up by Prop was particularly persuasive that community solutions will help. So then what it came down to was whether or not crimes of need and generalized crime going down is more important than a potential skyrocket in organized crime. And given the framing that we got from Prop, the crimes of need are the biggest crime in South Africa, we felt that it was persuasive enough for us to say that defunding the police is the best solution to reduce crime. And based on that, we gave our debate to proposition. Before we end, I'd just like to congratulate Luke, our Prop 2, for being best speaker in this debate, and congratulate all the speakers on their speeches. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Some tears for some and jumps for joys for others. Well done, White House. Luke, congratulations. That's fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen at home, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We wish you a wonderful night. Just another thank you must go out to the head of culture, Mr. Mark Mitchell, and of course, Josh Wrench, who has been instrumental behind the scenes, organizing the studio, setting up everything for our boys. And well done to both sides. Once again, Yes, there was a clear winner tonight, but I think, as I said earlier on, I think we're all winners for our future and for the future of our country. All right, thank you very much.